Coming up, energy policies that empower tyranny. Welcome to Just Facts News, where we bring you thoroughly vetted facts that other newscasts have ignored or distorted. In a recent episode of a CNN show called The Lead, host Jake Tapper interviewed Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. He asked Murphy about Joe Biden's recent plan to stop importing Russian oil into the United States. And Murphy said this.
Let's just admit the insanity of a U.S. economy that continues to run on oil that is provided to us by dictators. The reality is, if we're not getting this oil from Russia, we're likely going to be importing more from another brutal dictator in Saudi Arabia, for instance, or we may have to go to Venezuela for oil. We should ultimately learn our lesson here and become energy independent and choose to invest in clean domestic energy so we never have to choose between one dictator versus another.
Here's what Murphy and CNN failed to tell you. That plan has been repeatedly carried out, and it has produced even greater dependence on oil exporting nations like Russia. Germany is a prime example. It has largely banned fracking, shut down its nuclear power plants, and has aggressively mandated wind and solar. The results? In 2019, Germany imported 67% of its energy from foreign nations, up from 58% in the year 2000. The price of residential electricity in Germany is now 3 times greater than in the United States. And Germany recently lobbied Joe Biden to end sanctions put in place by Donald Trump that prevented a Russian pipeline carrying natural gas into Germany. This pipeline was completed just 6 months ago in September 2021, despite warnings that it could possibly facilitate a Russian invasion of Ukraine. This scenario is the exact opposite of the picture painted by Murphy. Why? Because solar only generates energy when the sun is shining, and wind only works when the wind is blowing. This means that these power sources have to be backed up by fossil fuel sources to generate energy when they are not producing. This is costly and limits wind and solar production in the US and throughout the world. That's why, after 40 plus years of the US government heavily subsidizing solar while punishing competing technologies with taxes and regulations, solar provided only 1.3% of all US energy in the year 2020. During the interview, Murphy also said this.
When we produce oil here in the United States, that goes to the highest bidder. Sometimes that's here in the U.S., but oftentimes that oil gets sent to China. That oil gets sent to Europe. Renewable energy stays in the United States. When we are producing energy from solar panels or from wind turbines, that stays on the American grid. So if you really care about keeping American-made energy in the United States, you should be investing in renewables.
Here again, Murphy made a highly misleading statement that empowers tyrannical regimes. And instead of pushing back on it, Tapper reiterated this point later in the show. Petroleum is a global market, and thus it sometimes makes sense for nations to import some and export some, even if it produces as much as it needs. This was the case in the United States even before the COVID-19 pandemic drastically reduced the need for gas because of government shutdowns. The US produced as much oil as it needed, and it also was a net exporter of natural gas. In contrast, the US solar and electric car industries are highly dependent upon communist China, which dominates the global supply chains for the key components in these products. This includes, for example, 73% of the world's supply of lithium-ion battery cells and 78% of the world's supply of solar cells. The bottom line is that until better technologies are invented, spending large sums of money on green energy enriches and empowers tyrannical regimes, making the U.S. dependent upon them. This may be why a shell company in Bermuda with deep ties to Vladimir Putin and Russian oil companies donated tens of millions of dollars to the Sierra Club and other U.S. environmental groups that oppose fossil fuel production. Thank you for joining us. Tune in next time for more thoroughly vetted facts that other newscasts have ignored or distorted.